My name is Elena Rossetti, and I never thought a simple case of the flu would turn into the most satisfying moment of my 3-year career at Cascade Tech Solutions. Working in the heart of Portland's Pearl District, I had always prided myself on being the reliable one, the marketing coordinator who showed up early, stayed late, and never complained about the endless client presentations or last-minute campaign changes. In all my time there, I could count on one hand the number of sick days I had taken, and most of those were for doctor appointments I couldn't reschedule. That Tuesday morning in late October started like any other Portland fall day, with rain pattering against my apartment windows and the smell of coffee from the shop downstairs drifting up through the old building's vents. But when I tried to sit up in bed, my head felt like it was filled with concrete, and my throat felt like I had been gargling with gravel all night. The fever hit me in waves, making me alternate between shivering under my blankets and kicking them off when the heat became unbearable. I knew immediately that this wasn't just a little sniffle or the kind of thing you could power through with some tea and determination. By 7 a.m, I was coughing so hard that my ribs ached, and every breath felt like sandpaper scraping against my lungs. The responsible thing to do was obvious, especially in our open-plan office where we all sat practically on top of each other. I grabbed my phone and sent a message to my boss, Marcus Webb, explaining that I was feeling terrible and asking if I could work from home for the day to avoid spreading whatever plague had taken hold of me. I had done all my marketing reports the night before, and most of my work could easily be handled remotely anyway. Marcus Webb was the kind of middle manager who seemed to think that flexibility was a 4-letter word. He had been promoted from the sales team about 6 months earlier, and ever since then, he had been on a mission to prove his authority by making everyone's life just a little bit more difficult. He was the type who would schedule meetings that could have been emails, who insisted on approving every single social media post even though he knew nothing about marketing, and who seemed to take personal offense at the idea that work could be done anywhere other than under his watchful eye. His response came back within 15 minutes, and I could practically hear his smug tone through the text. No exceptions, Elena. Company policy is clear. If you are well enough to work, you are well enough to be here. We have important client presentations this week, and I need all hands on deck. I stared at the message, feeling a mixture of disbelief and anger bubbling up through my fever-induced haze. This was the same man who had worked from home just last month when his car was in the shop, and who regularly left early on Fridays for his golf games. I tried calling him, thinking that maybe if he could hear how awful I sounded, he would reconsider. But when he picked up, his voice was even more dismissive than his text had been. Look, Elena, I understand you are not feeling great, but we all have to push through sometimes. That is what being a professional means. Take some medicine, drink some coffee, and get yourself to the office. We have the Morrison account presentation at 2, and I need you here to handle the logistics. The line went dead before I could even respond. Sitting there in my pajamas, surrounded by used tissues and empty teacups, I felt something shift inside me. For 3 years, I had been the model employee, the one who never pushed back, who always said yes to overtime and weekend work, who covered for colleagues when they were out sick or on vacation. And this was how my dedication was rewarded, with a boss who cared more about his perception of control than the health and safety of his entire team. I made a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. If Marcus Webb wanted me in the office so badly, then that was exactly where I would be. I dragged myself out of bed, my legs shaky and my head spinning, and stumbled to the shower. The hot water felt good on my aching muscles, but it also made me even more lightheaded. I had to sit down on the shower floor for a minute, letting the steam help clear my congested sinuses, while I gathered the strength to stand up again. Getting dressed was an ordeal in itself. Every movement seemed to require tremendous effort, and I had to stop several times to catch my breath. I chose my most professional outfit, a navy blue blazer and matching pants that I usually wore for important client meetings. If I was going to make a statement, I wanted to look the part. I loaded up on tissues, throat lozenges, and over-the-counter flu medicine, though I knew it would only take the edge off the worst symptoms. The drive to the office was a nightmare. Portland traffic was its usual mess, and I found myself having coughing fits that were so intense I had to pull over twice to make sure I could still see the road clearly. By the time I finally made it to our building's parking garage, I felt like I had run a marathon. My hands were shaking as I gathered my bag and laptop, and I had to use the elevator handrail to keep myself steady. Our office was on the 12th floor, and as the elevator climbed, I could feel my ears popping from the congestion. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored walls and almost laughed at how terrible I looked. My face was pale except for the bright red flush of fever across my cheeks. My eyes were watery and bloodshot, and my hair was a mess despite my best efforts to make it presentable. I looked exactly like what I was, someone who should have been home in bed, not heading into a shared workspace. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into the familiar buzz of our open-plan office. The morning energy hit me like a wall of sound. Conversations and keyboard clicking and phone calls all blending together in a way that made my head pound even worse. I made my way toward my desk, which was positioned right in the middle of the marketing pod, surrounded by 5 other workstations in a neat little cluster. The reactions were immediate, and exactly what I had expected. Sarah, from graphic design, looked up from her computer and her eyes went wide. "Elena, oh my God, you look terrible. Are you okay?" Before I could answer, James from the social media team was already scooting his chair back from our shared workspace. "Dude, you sound like you are dying. Maybe you should go home." Their concern was genuine, and I felt a pang of guilt for potentially exposing them to whatever virus had taken hold of me. But I also felt a surge of vindication. These were the reactions of reasonable people, the kind of response that any normal manager would have had when I had called in sick. I managed a weak smile and explained that I had asked to work from home, but had been told that company policy required me to be in the office. The looks of disbelief and anger on their faces told me everything I needed to know about how they felt about Marcus's decision. I settled into my desk chair and immediately had a coughing fit that seemed to echo through our section of the office. It was one of those deep, chest-rattling coughs that sounds like it might never stop, and I could see people around me exchanging worried glances. I tried to muffle it with my elbow, but there was no hiding the fact that I was seriously ill. Every few minutes, another coughing spell would hit, and I would have to grab a handful of tissues to deal with the aftermath. Marcus's office was positioned so that he could see most of the main workspace through his glass walls, and I knew he would notice my arrival. Sure enough, about 20 minutes after I had sat down, I saw him emerge from his office with a coffee mug in hand, making his usual rounds to check on everyone's progress. He was the type who liked to hover, to make sure everyone knew he was watching, and I could see him working his way through the different department clusters. When he reached our marketing area, his steps slowed, and I could see the exact moment when he realized I had actually shown up. His expression went through several changes in quick succession. Surprise, then annoyance, then something that might have been recognition of the situation he had created. But his pride would not let him back down, at least not immediately. Instead, he forced a smile and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Good morning, Elena. I am glad to see you made it in despite not feeling well. That is the kind of dedication we need around here." The comment was clearly meant for the benefit of the other employees, a way of reinforcing his authority and making it seem like my presence was a choice, rather than the result of his inflexibility. But the effect was the opposite of what he intended. I could see the looks of disgust and disbelief on my colleagues' faces, the way they glanced at each other with expressions that clearly said they thought Marcus was being unreasonable. I managed to croak out a response, my voice so hoarse it was barely recognizable. "Of course, Marcus. Just following company policy like you said." The words came out between coughs, and I made sure to look directly at him when I said it. For just a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes, as if he was starting to realize that this might not have been his best decision. The morning progressed like a slow-motion disaster. Every task that would normally take me 15 minutes stretched into an hour-long ordeal. I would start typing an email and then have to stop for a coughing fit that left me gasping and reaching for water. Simple phone calls became impossible because I could barely speak without my voice cracking or dissolving into coughs. I had to excuse myself from a conference call with a client because I could not stop coughing long enough to explain our latest campaign metrics. My colleagues were doing their best to help, bringing me tea and offering to take over some of my responsibilities, but I politely declined. This was not about getting the work done efficiently. This was about following Marcus's directive to the letter. If he wanted me here, then I would be here, in all my feverish, contagious glory, making it impossible for anyone to ignore just how unreasonable his policy was. By late morning, The effects of my presence were becoming impossible to ignore. People were giving me a wide berth when they walked past my desk, and I could see some of my colleagues discreetly opening windows despite the chilly October weather outside. The usual collaborative energy of our workspace had been replaced by a tense atmosphere where everyone was trying to be polite, while also clearly wishing I was anywhere else. The turning point came during our scheduled team meeting at 11:30. We all crowded into the small conference room that Marcus preferred for our weekly check-ins, and the close quarters made my symptoms even more obvious. I was sitting directly across from Marcus, and every time I coughed or sniffled, I could see him flinch slightly. The other team members kept shooting worried glances between me and him, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but not sure how to address it. I made sure to participate actively in the meeting, asking questions and offering suggestions just like I always did, but every contribution was punctuated by coughing fits or the need to pause and blow my nose. At one point, I had such a severe coughing spell that I had to step out of the room for a moment, and when I came back, I could see that Marcus looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time. After the meeting, as we were all filing out of the conference room, I overheard Sarah whispering to James, "This is insane. She is going to get everyone sick, and for what? Because Marcus has some kind of power trip about working from home?" The comment was not meant for me to hear, but I was glad I caught it, because it confirmed that my colleagues understood exactly what was happening. The afternoon brought the Morrison account presentation that Marcus had been so worried about. It was supposed to be our big pitch to land a major new client, the kind of presentation that could make or break our quarterly numbers. I had been working on the logistics for weeks, coordinating with the creative team, making sure all the materials were ready, and preparing backup plans for any technical issues. But as the presentation time approached, it became clear that my condition was getting worse, not better. The medicine I had taken that morning was wearing off, and the fever was making me feel increasingly disoriented. I was having trouble focusing on my computer screen, and my hands were shaking enough that typing was becoming difficult. Marcus had been checking on me every hour or so throughout the day, each time looking more concerned than the last. I could see him struggling with the decision he had made, probably realizing that having a severely ill employee front and center during an important client presentation was not exactly the professional image he wanted to project. At 1:30, just 30 minutes before the Morrison team was scheduled to arrive, Marcus finally approached my desk. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. "Elena," he said quietly, "maybe you should consider going home early today. You still do not sound very good, and I would hate for you to overexert yourself." I looked up at him with what I hoped was an expression of innocent confusion. "But Marcus, you said that if I was well enough to work, I was well enough to be here. I am still working, so I should still be here, right? I would not want to violate company policy." My voice was so hoarse by this point that I could barely get the words out, but I made sure he could hear every one of them. The look on his face was exactly what I had been hoping for. It was the expression of someone who had suddenly realized that their own words were being used against them, and there was no graceful way out of the situation they had created. He stood there for a moment, clearly trying to think of a response that would not make him look like he was completely reversing his earlier position. Before he could come up with anything, I was hit by another massive coughing fit, this one worse than any I had experienced all day. It went on for what felt like forever, leaving me gasping and having to put my head down on my desk to catch my breath. When I finally looked up, I could see that several people had stopped what they were doing to stare, and Marcus looked genuinely alarmed. "You know what?" he said quickly. "I think it might be best if you go home and rest. We can handle the Morrison presentation without you today. Just make sure you get better before you come back." He was trying to make it sound like he was being generous, but I could hear the desperation in his voice. The client meeting was less than 20 minutes away, and he was finally realizing that having me there would be a disaster. I made a show of looking disappointed, as if I really had been looking forward to working through my illness for the good of the company. "Are you sure, Marcus? I mean, I know how important this presentation is, and you did say that all hands needed to be on deck. I would hate to let the team down by leaving early." Each word was a struggle to get out, but I wanted to make sure he understood that this was his decision, not mine. No, he said quickly. "I insist. Your health is the most important thing. We can manage without you today. Just go home and get some rest, and feel free to work remotely tomorrow if you are still not feeling well." The irony of his words was not lost on either of us. After spending the entire day insisting that remote work was impossible, he was now practically begging me to stay home. I gathered my things slowly, making sure to cough a few more times as I packed up my laptop and papers. Several of my colleagues came over to wish me well and to express their hope that I would feel better soon, and I could see the genuine concern in their eyes. They understood that I had been put in an impossible situation, and they were supportive of the point I had made. As I waited for the elevator, I could see Marcus through the glass walls of the conference room, frantically trying to reorganize the presentation materials and brief the team on my usual responsibilities. The Morrison clients had just arrived, and I could see him putting on his best fake smile as he greeted them, probably hoping they would not notice that one of his key team members had just fled the building looking like an extra from a zombie movie. The elevator ride down felt like a victory lap. I had followed Marcus's instructions to the letter, and in doing so, I had exposed the fundamental flaw in his rigid thinking. By insisting that I come to the office while clearly ill, he had created a situation that was far more disruptive than if he had just allowed me to work from home in the first place. The drive home was much easier than the morning commute had been, partly because I was feeling a small surge of satisfaction that was helping to counteract some of the flu symptoms. I had made my point without ever being directly confrontational or insubordinate. I had simply done exactly what my boss had asked me to do, and let the natural consequences speak for themselves. When I got back to my apartment, I immediately made myself a cup of tea and settled into bed with my laptop. Despite feeling terrible, I was able to accomplish more work in 2 hours from my couch than I had managed during the entire day at the office. Without the distractions and the physical effort of maintaining a professional appearance while seriously ill, I could focus on the tasks that actually mattered. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus around 4 o'clock. "Hope you are feeling better. The Morrison presentation went well. Please feel free to work from home tomorrow and Friday if you need to recover. We want you back at full strength." The message was trying to sound magnanimous, but I could read between the lines. The presentation had probably been a scrambled mess without me there to handle the logistics, and he was now desperately trying to prevent a repeat of today's disaster. Over the next few days, word of what had happened spread through the office like wildfire. My colleagues were more than happy to share the story of how I had shown up looking like death warmed over, coughed my way through meetings, and essentially forced Marcus to reverse his no-work-from-home policy through sheer biological warfare. The story got funnier with each telling, and I became something of a folk hero among the staff. The real vindication came the following Monday, when I returned to the office feeling much better. As I was settling into my desk, Sarah from graphic design leaned over with a huge grin on her face. "Elena, you are not going to believe this, but Marcus called in sick today. So did Jennifer from accounting and Dave from sales. Apparently, there is some kind of flu going around the office." She paused for dramatic effect before adding, "I wonder where they could have caught it." The irony was perfect and completely predictable. By insisting that I come to work while contagious, Marcus had created exactly the outcome that my original request to work from home had been designed to prevent. Half the management team was now out sick, and the office was running on a skeleton crew right during one of our busiest periods of the year. Even better, the company's human resources department had apparently taken notice of the situation. Later that week, we received an updated policy memo about sick leave and remote work options, with language that specifically encouraged employees to stay home when they were feeling unwell to prevent the spread of illness in the workplace. The memo did not mention my situation specifically, but everyone knew exactly what had prompted the policy change. Marcus was out for the rest of the week, and when he finally returned, he looked sheepish every time he saw me. The dynamic between us had shifted permanently, and not in a way that favored him. His credibility as a manager had taken a serious hit, and everyone in the department now knew that his rigid policies were based more on ego than on sound business judgment. The best part was that I had never once been insubordinate or unprofessional. I had followed his instructions exactly, showed up when he demanded it, and worked as hard as I could under the circumstances. The fact that doing so had exposed the flaws in his management style was just a natural consequence of his own poor decision-making. From that day forward, Marcus was much more flexible about remote work requests, not just from me, but from the entire team. He seemed to have learned that sometimes the best way to maintain productivity and professionalism is to trust your employees to make reasonable decisions about their own circumstances. And I had learned that sometimes the most effective form of resistance is simply doing exactly what you are told to do, especially when the person giving the orders has not really thought through the consequences. Looking back on that terrible Tuesday, I realized that my flu had taught me something valuable about standing up for myself in the workplace. Sometimes you do not need to argue or fight back directly. Sometimes you just need to follow instructions so perfectly that the absurdity of the situation becomes impossible to ignore. And sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is simply letting someone's own bad decisions speak for themselves.